event was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, Cosmic Family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth. The truth.
You can't handle the truth.
It's time to go inside the matrix. Inside the matrix. With your host, Jimmy Brent.
Hey everybody, welcome to Inside the Matrix. I'm glad that all of you could join us today. I hope everybody is doing well in spite of yet another week of the masquerade, the Corona 1984 craziness that we're experiencing. Before we get started, I wanted to take a minute to thank those of you who have been sponsoring the show and helping us financially. We really appreciate all of you, and we appreciate all of our listeners. Whether you listen live or you listen to the pre-recorded archive version, we appreciate all of you. My guest today is Howdie Mickoski. He's the author of several books, including The Power of Then, Revealing Egypt's Lost Wisdom, Falling for Truth, A Spiritual Death and Awakening, and Exposing the Expositions, Ancient Rome in America. He also now has a growing YouTube channel that covers the subjects of his books, all the way from the rebuilding of Stonehenge to the metaphor of Plato's cave, to the esoteric wisdom in movies such as Donnie Darko. Howdie has researched all through the ancient world, from Mexico to Egypt, and in the last year turned his focus to the history of the 1800s and what is found to be mostly a series of believed lies, seemingly centered on those giant world fairs, built in record times, then immediately blown up and destroyed. It seems like these were the indoctrination centers of the last reset. He began his study of ancient Egyptian and alchemic wisdom over 20 years ago and was fortunate to have met and learned from a Korean Zen monk, several Native American medicine men, a doctor of Qigong, and others. They helped to take the conceptual ideas of the years of study at ancient sites and from various books to be turned into day-to-day practice and examination. Finding your own answers within is the only real message on any path of understanding. But what is found is meant to be shared. That's awesome. Howdie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I've been following your work for a while now, and you are on many of the top podcasts and YouTube channels and websites, going into this subject of history and the lies that we've been told. And I really find your work fascinating, and you're quite a scholarly researcher, and we really appreciate that.
Thanks. It's been quite strange. Like you say, I wrote my first Egypt book about 15 years ago and was pretty much ignored. Then I wrote the book on Falling for Truth, which was more about a death experience I had and the realizations that came from that, and was kind of ignored. And then last year, I wrote the exposition book, and for some reason in the last 6 months it hit some sort of zeitgeist or something, and it's just everything around it has just sort of exploded for me. So it's been quite a thing the last 6 months, actually.
That's great. Now, I always ask our guests that are new to the show to kind of go through your background a bit and give our listeners sort of a feel for where you came from, where you were born, what your family life was like, how you were raised, and kind of give us an idea of how you got to the mindset that you have today.
Okay, well, I'll sort of try to keep this to 5 minutes or something less, and you can go into whatever you want to beyond that, right?
Sure.
I was born in Canada. Mostly grew up in the capital of Ottawa. I was pretty much a hockey player and a guy that was very very outgoing, and I think anybody who knew me in high school would consider me to be sort of a comedian in training. And pretty much was enjoying life until near the end of my university career. My father stole all my money. And wow. So he was a psychopath, and of course I didn't realize he was a psychopath till many years later. But so right in the middle of that, I had all of my my money stolen and made going back to university and finishing my degree very, very difficult. So I had that first set of challenge, and then a few years after that, an ex-girlfriend of mine was murdered. And these experiences got me already starting to go off the normal channels. Granted, I didn't handle them very well at the time. I mean, I really, especially a boy at the time, and there wasn't really a lot of resources. This was in the early 90s, and so I never really got much help for it, and kind of just dealt with it on my own poorly, Yeah. I went to Australia to play some hockey over there for a couple of years, and in the course of being there, started a stand-up comedian career. So I was a comedian for 15 years or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, which is bizarre for people who know me now, because now I'm not funny at all. It's like the humor's just been sucked right out of me. But again, that being a comedian does also as well force you to see. You have to see the world differently, right? Because you're looking, no matter what you walk past, you're looking for what's different about it, what's strange about it. What can you twist around to make that humor?
Sure.
So it's a different mindset. And then, around 97 or 98, I was in the midst of a really deep depression, kind of all of these things of my life, and things just were not going well, and actually wanted to kill myself.
Oh.
And I just couldn't think of a good way to do it that wouldn't be messy for the person having to clean it up. So I didn't, and it was on my birthday, I guess 97, that a television show came on, a Nova program on PBS called This Old Pyramid, which was supposed to be about constructing a pyramid. Mm-hmm. And it was like instantaneously seeing this program, like that's my life. That's what I'm supposed to do. Like wow. It was just clear. That's it. That's my life. And from there, I just began an intense study of the ancient world, and was very lucky to bump into books of people like John Anthony West and Peter Tompkins. And so right away, I was able to push myself away from the mainstream story, which made no sense once you read it, of copper tools and ramps and all of those things just logically make no sense. And in the course of that, one of the first pieces I wanted to get into the ancient mind. Like I wanted to try to understand the people who lived 3, 5, 10,000 years ago, and I knew I could only do that if I tried to think like them. Like I couldn't think like me, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I started searching for people who could help me, again, change this mindset. And I was very lucky to meet, like I say, the people that you mentioned in that opening bio, the Korean Zen monk and several native medicine men and whatnot. Right. And it really just helped to start taking, because it was the idea of the things of ancient Egypt, other than the buildings and the texts and the books were gone, but maybe something survives in other cultures. And this was my way of hands-on. What do other cultures do? How do they do their healings? What do other understandings? And then could I take that to Egypt and learn that? So I was doing that for 6 or 7 years, and then I fell into a canyon and died. And in the midst of the death experience, realized, I guess, what a Buddhist would call nothingness or nirvana or emptiness, the complete nothingness of self and reality. And then when I came out of that experience, here I had done 10 years of intense spiritual practice. I didn't read the books, like I did it.
Yeah.
When I read Carlos Castaneda's books, I didn't read them. I did them. I actually did spend 5 years doing my life recapitulation, for example. Like everything that was given to me, I did. And now I had this experience, and it was kind of like, well, I don't know if any of this actually matters or not. And I went through a pretty stark up and down of either really great clarity or really deep, I don't want to call it depression, but just strangeness, because the egoic mind, once you have an experience like that, you begin to see what the egoic mind is and what it isn't,
Sure.
But it isn't gone, and it's reorganizing itself. So I've had a difficult sort of 10-year period after that. And then that led me to 2019, which I guess the main thing we're going to talk about first, and that was I was in Florence, and I was studying some cathedrals there, looking for because I started to see them as machines, and I wanted to really go into as many of these old cathedrals as possible in Italy and try to see the machine-like quality. When I came home, somehow in some research, I bumped into a video on the World's Fair, so the Chicago World's Fair of 1893, and once I looked into it, I just said, "This is insane. This is absolutely insane."
Yep.
And it just sucked me in for a year, and the book came out a year ago.
Oh, that is so fascinating. And what you've been through, few humans ever go to those depths, to those lengths, to really understand our lives, right? And a couple years
Well, a lot of people are. It's funny because, when I first started what you might call work, you go to the standard spiritual sources, the big names and the standard stuff. Mm-hmm. And so people do that and they think they're getting somewhere. But often, as I've come to know better, it's the people who are really making progress are the ones who've had tough lives. They've had trauma. They've had difficulty. And they have gone within themselves to ask questions of themselves, to get, and those are the ones that are going to really make progress, as opposed to just getting a bunch of exercises and doing them repeatedly over and over for seemingly no reason. So lots of people out there that are listening right now have probably done more than you think you have. It's just not what's in the normal, the best-selling books, but it's probably more real stuff than you might think.
Absolutely. And, it's sort of trial by fire, right? It's plunging yourself and your life into situations that are so far beyond what's considered, normal. And of course, you have to question that whole concept of normal, because we've been fed so many lies in our life, in our lives, in our civilizations. We know so very, very little about what actually is happening. And now, thanks to people like you, we're beginning to get an inkling of a few things, but we're still a long ways away from understanding where we've been as civilizations, right?
I would agree, and it's more, I try to consider whatever little bit I'm doing, it's like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and it kind of can't just sit on its own. It needs the other people who are doing other areas and other things, that all of these jigsaw pieces need to come together, and maybe then we can get a better understanding of what this reality really is, what this experience we're having really is. It requires almost like a group effort to, I think, get it.
Yeah, and the explanations that we've been given typically, let's just take the Egypt pyramids that everybody is very familiar with. The idea that a bunch of slaves were dragging these giant slabs of, stone or rock or quartz or whatever they are over hundreds of miles and then, up these ramps. And, it's so absurd. It goes beyond any, thinking person's ability to rationalize, because it's just ridiculous, the stories that they've given us. And it doesn't end there. Pretty much, almost everything in history is the stories they give us are absolutely ridiculous. And then let's just kind of go to the 1800s, where it seemed like so much happened. There's some beginning technology that they tell us in the history books, the industrial age or whatever. But it doesn't explain how these incredible buildings showed up all over the world. They may refer to them as like Greco-Roman or a certain style. But as you said, these appeared to be buildings with built-in technology. Can you kind of give us an idea of your thoughts on that?
Sure, I can give you an overview of what we're talking about. So because we're on radio, and so I would suggest that some people out there who are following along, maybe you'd be able to put a link or two or something in the description later to some photos of things like the Chicago World's Fair or the St. Louis World's Fair or something. Or if not, just pump it in a search engine yourself, so you have some images up, so you can kind of know what we're talking about here when you see that we're not just talking about buildings, we're talking about colossal, massive architecture, and stunning architecture, and well, like you say, these expositions are happening all over the world. it's more interesting with the ones in the United States because you can at least say, well, in Paris they've had 1,000 years of building and whatnot, but in a place like the United States that's supposed to have only really started in 1776, kind of, where do all these buildings come from? And I'll give you a great example for anyone out there. No matter what state, if you're in the United States right now, you have a state capitol building. And I guarantee that state capitol building was probably built in the 1800s, well, at a time when there was a few thousand people in the city, and you've built this monstrous thing that would fit perfect in downtown Rome, and you have to ask yourself, how the heck did they do that?
Yeah.
And why would they do that? Why would you build the domes and the towers? So for me, it kind of got into... I know Jimmy asked me a question. I will actually answer it here. And so when I started looking at the World's Fair specifically, and we can talk about the specific ones along the way, but the one that sort of popped in my head first was the one in 1893 in Chicago, which was the largest up to that time.
Amazing.
And it got serious for me when I took the photographs to a building contractor, and a guy who builds large structures his whole life. And I showed him the photographs, and his sort of first response is like, what is this? I said, well, it's a World Exposition. And I showed him the whole thing because it was 700 acres. The Chicago Exposition was 700 acres. One of the buildings there could house 300,000 people. That's the size of it. And you're talking every state had a building. Every country had a building.
Yep.
And there were probably 20 or 30 giant buildings there. There were domes and towers and lakes and rivers. They had an electric above-ground running train. They had an electric walkway. It's just unbelievable. So I asked this building contractor, could you build this for me today? He said, yeah, I could build it for you today. I said, what would you need? If you unlimited money. Well, I need 50,000 guys. We're going to need about 2 years to do the planning because this is an incredibly detailed experience that we're doing. So we have to plan it properly. Then we're going to need 2 years to do the digging on like the canals and the lakes and sort of because it's on a swamp. It was built on a swamp, so you have to do this next. And then he said, give us 10 to 12 years for all the buildings. So I said, get around 15 years. He said, yeah, 15 years, we could probably get this done. So I told him, okay, so in 1891, they built this in 2 years. And his response now was, that's just not possible. And that's where it that's where it got serious for me. Yeah. When, because I was looking for this guy to give me some sort of inroad, So he's saying 15 years today with modern machines, modern everything, modern digging equipment. And, they're supposed to have started this in 1891 and finished it in 1893. And then again, once these things are done, the second they're over, they just blow the things up, tear them down, throw them in the garbage. It's the most insane thing possible. And they did it again and again and again and again, city after city after city, building these monstrous things and then just blowing them up.
Yeah, and
at least that's the story.
Now, also, I found fascinating that a lot of these cities have had massive fires, which they, I think, also used as sort of a cover story of how they decided to, blow up these buildings or get rid of them, right?
Well, I don't know. So I also in the book, I realized I couldn't just study all the facts. I couldn't just do the fair in Buffalo or St. Louis or San Francisco because each city has its own bizarre history that also needs to be brought out. And just about every city in North America has a fire sometime in the 1800s, like a massive fire.
Yeah.
And we can get to this later because when you look at the photos of the fires, they don't look like any fire I've ever seen.
Right.
And same thing with some other, these other building contractors, same thing. They've seen lots of fires. And these cities look like Dresden in 1944. So you have to wonder what happened. But then the point is, like a city like Chicago has supposedly this giant fire in 1871. Okay, they need buildings. Right? You just had a fire burn down a lot of your city, so they built this massive exposition and then, basically just tear it down. But what's even more amazing when you look at Chicago, they weren't just building 700 acres of the World's Fair at that time. Oh, no. They were also building the University of Chicago, which now Nelson Rockefeller was pumping in a bunch of money to put in, of course, some sort of Gothic-style, massive beautiful buildings that would fit perfectly in downtown Prague. They're building almost something that looks like the Parthenon in the center of Chicago that became the library. So it's like 700 acres of the World's Fair. Yeah, that's nothing. We can keep building all this other stuff too. And
all at the same time.
Yeah, so as you dig into the story and just think logically, it's pretty obvious that the story's not true. and where you start going from that, of like when you start to, well, what could be true? Boy, that started taking me in some pretty intense directions.
Absolutely. And I want people to, like you said earlier, Howdy, they should, if they can, while we're talking about this, look on the internet, look for images of the Chicago World's Fair, I think the Buffalo World's Fair. What were some of the other really big ones?
Oh, there was one in the biggest was in St. Louis in 1904. There was one in San Francisco in 1915, but they were everywhere. Omaha, Nebraska, Nashville, Portland, Seattle. But those are the largest ones. The ones at the largest buildings. Those would be Chicago, Buffalo, St. Louis. St. Louis is the best one to have supposed construction photos that we can talk about, these very weird construction photos. And then San Francisco, which built it, again, just 9 years after the earthquake, well, yeah.
Whatever and that then, was.
Again, yeah, and then just tore it all down again.
Yeah, but you have to really see these images to know what we're talking about, because these structures are so amazing. They're massive in size. They're incredibly beautiful. They're incredibly detailed. I mean, they look like something out of an ancient fairy tale of the gods or something. It's just so far beyond. Even today, there's really nothing that compares that I've seen. All these ancient buildings just make the things that we build today look like just little square box nothings. Like even the picture on the cover of my book, it's got the 65-foot high statue, golden statue that was supposed to be at the fair of what they called it, Lady of the Fair, but it's Columbia. And then there's a giant lake. Then there's the domed building, like a massive domed building that would be the same as these state capitals. You've got the electrical building on the side that probably would have held 80 or 90,000 people if you could have got it in. And then the back, there's another set of buildings that would have held, you could put 150,000 people into those. And that's just one tiny picture of a small part of the fair. And the buildings are, like you say, I mean, this would not look out of place in downtown Rome. Yeah, it's just absolutely amazing to me. And when you see there are some pictures of the people there. The people there, they all look like they came from the same place, sort of. They dress the same. It just, if you took a crowd today, let's say a football game or something, and it took a picture of them, what they look like, just generally speaking, and you took a picture of these people from this time, so completely different, wouldn't you say? Yes, and I think that's why it's still important to study this right now, because to me, I mean, we're going through history right now. I mean, what's going to be one of the greatest historical events is happening right now. Yes. And so for me, it's like studying anything that doesn't take you into what's going on now is a waste of time. Mm-hmm. We don't have time. But to me, these fairs still have importance, because it's like, to me, I'm getting a sense of, like you say, the people are like, they're almost like they're just wanderers. Like they just don't belong in the photos almost. And it's like we're seeing the next, whatever the last reset was happened. And these fairs may have been like the new doorway into the new world that we've lived for the last 150 or so years. Hold that thought, Howdy. I sorry to cut you off, but we're running up against a hard break. So you're listening to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Howdie Mickoski. We're going to take a short pause, so stick around with us. We'll be back with lots more in just a little bit. All right, everybody, welcome back to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Howdie Mickoski. And we've been discussing the crazy ideas of what they've thrown at us called history, knowing that we've been lied to big time. And we've been talking about the World's Fairs and the incredible, massive structures that were constructed around the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Howdy, let's pick up where we left off there, if you would, please. Sure. So we were going into, like I say, the possibility of this being some sort of strange after reset experience, because
one of the things that after really going into detail on these expositions, because every single exposition at the time had about 4 or 5 guidebooks. Like we would get a Lonely Planet and go to Paris. Well, they had like the equivalent. Rand McNally had travel guides for all of these expositions in detail. And right after the fairs were done, there was always a historian of the day wrote a history of the fair. And I mean, these are like 2,000, 3,000 pages of information.
Wow.
And as you go through this stuff, you begin to see how many bizarre things are going on at these fairs, how many strange, I would almost call it indoctrination concepts are being presented to the population. There was a lot of the area where there was they all had things called midways. That's where we got the word from. It came actually from the Chicago Exposition, which was not just fun things to do. They were also, in most of these, they wanted a human zoo where they could show off savages from all the different cultures of the world, and show how the white Victorian was so far above the zoo savages. And some of the stuff that's in the book is literally incredible. In Buffalo, Buffalo was the weirdest fair of them all. They actually made the Indians slaughter 7,000 dogs in the middle of the Coliseum one day, so that the people could watch the Indians kill and not just kill them, they had to eat them, so that the dogs were actually eaten in the Coliseum of Buffalo. And they had like 5,000 people come out to watch it.
It's so bizarre. It just insanity.
How about this one? This is also from the Buffalo Fair. I'm reading this is going to be from the Buffalo Evening News, because they had an exhibit there, right? I mean, these midways also, never mind the buildings on how much was there. The midways had, like, if you go into what was in the midways in St. Louis, it would blow Disneyland out of the water. Wow. Actually, what you had options to do. But this was one here in Buffalo called the Old Plantation. And this is the exact, I'm quoting now exactly, so it's going to be, this is harsh, but this is what was in the paper about it. Genuine Southern darkies, 200 of them, ranging in years from wee, toddling pickaninnies to Negroes, gray and bent with age, can be seen each day at the exposition at their different occupations and pastimes. Lovers of Negro melodies will have a feast. Many of the darkies will be selected because of their special talents as singers and banjo players, and they will dance and sing to the seductive tinkling of instruments exactly as the Negroes of the South used to do in the long, long ago.
Oh my God, it's so disgusting.
Yeah.
What was wrong with those people? I mean, that is so sick and twisted.
But it's a great example to see where we've come. This is the world that we have now. This is where it originated. These fairs were the origination point of all of it. They had huge historical exhibits where I think the history that they wanted presented was in some way created and put forth at these expositions, that this is the history everyone is going to believe starting today. And so there was so many elements of these fairs as you go through them that are kind of indicators of where we've gone since.
Wow, that makes so much sense. I think you're really onto something there, those fairs were the beginning of the restructuring of our history. And yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, I'm sure you've run across it too, but there are some Russian historians that have maintained that we've had up to 1,000 years inserted in our timeline that never occurred, somewhere in the Middle Ages or something. Have you ever run into that?
Yep, I've ran into that, and I sort of mentioned that briefly in my book. I sort of have a chapter near the end that sort of covers a lot of these what you might call elements that if people study the fairs, they're going to run into, names like alternate history or star forts or cathedrals or, mud flood or whatever. So the 1,000 years are, it's hard to say. I mean, it's almost certain that the time, what we call history, has been greatly manipulated. Mm-hmm. In some ways, I think we've seen numbers of years taken out, and we've seen number of years in other places added. Like I say, I think those city fires, which are spread out to be 100 years or so of time, they might. What if those had only happened over 5 years of time? In reality,
yeah,
well, that's not indicating fire, that's indicating warfare. And if you're talking continent-wide warfare that destroys every city, you've got a whole lot of different questions than, the usual answer for that is, well, you know, the buildings, they were all built of wood. So once one building caught on fire, then, you know, they'll all go on fire. But then you look at the photographs, and it's not wood that's there. It's literally melted and charred stone.
Or brick,
and
right?
I've got photos, brick. And I've got photos of Chicago from 1858, so long before the fire, and there's not a piece of wood in sight. It's all brick and stone, so how does that burn?
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. And then there's some other strange anomalies, too, that I've noticed pictures of orphan trains. Have you seen those?
Oh, yeah. Aren't those strange?
Yeah. I mean, where did these orphans come from? What event or events created the need to have these orphan trains, and where were they going? And where? I mean, there's so many questions just on that there were massive amounts of orphanages, and also insane asylums, too, right? A lot of these buildings, they say, were whatever they were repurposed as insane asylums, or they originally were insane asylums.
Yeah, that'll take us to. I'll go back to that'll perfect segue point back to the fair. But yeah, those things to me go together: the orphan trains and the insane asylums, because they're right around the same time period. So you have all of these kids, which is perfect if you want to repopulate and start anew, fresh. You know, a child will believe what you tell them.
That's right. And they have no memory of the history.
No, they have none at all. They'll believe what they're told. And now, but all of a sudden, you maybe still have a whole lot of adults left who do remember the history and don't want to go along with the new narrative. So you've got to put them away, because the number of insane asylums that are built in like the 1880s and the 1890s worldwide is staggering. It's staggering. And the size of them are bigger and more beautiful than like Medici palaces in Florence. So why? Like, just go, seriously, go Google search, insane asylums, 1880s or 1890s or something, and just see what kind of images are going to come up to you. And you're going to say, do you really need to build something like that as an insane asylum?
Really?
It's beyond belief. So that sort of takes us, I think, back to something I kind of didn't mention in the first segment there, which is really important to what this whole discussion is about. And that is, it was okay, if my building contractor is correct and this can't be done in 2 years, for example, like you can't build the St. Louis Exposition in 2 years. The standard answer, by the way, that the standard historian, and I am a historian, by the way, I didn't mention that
Absolutely.
In my opening. I actually did go to university. I have a degree, and I did finally finish my degree. It was very difficult, and I wished I'd questioned more when I was in university. I believed a little bit too much, but okay. The standard historian will tell you that these buildings were all built as something called staff, which is a kind of plaster and wood bracing, and that's how they were able to be built so quickly. But I'll have you take a look, for example, at the Buffalo Electric Tower in 1901. That thing is 395 feet tall. Wow. It was covered with, I think, 50,000 light bulbs. So there were more light bulbs at the Buffalo World's Fair than I think most of the United States at the time. And the electric tower you were allowed to go on the top of it and look and sort of like see the fair from the top. So are you really going to risk people, and particularly these are wealthy elites, right? That's who's going to these fairs, that they're going to climb to the top of your plaster electric tower and then have it collapse and they're all going to die? No. But that's the standard answer. Standard answer is it's built with plaster. But then when you look at the construction photos, and this is another thing my building contractor couldn't believe, that the St. Louis Fair has the most amount of construction photos. And what you usually see is a building in the background, fully completed, fully built, with scaffolding on the side of it, and nothing going on anywhere else. He looked at it and he said, well, what is this? I mean, where's your building supplies? If you're building stuff, you need the supplies right next to the site. Well, where's the road? There's no road anywhere. How do you get the building supplies across dirt? Well, you need a road. You don't have that. Where's the sign that there's even been like a coffee cup put down, or an empty someone's sandwich wrapper or something?
Paper
you know, I mean,
bag,
if you need 20, 30,000 guys, where's the bathrooms for them to go to the bathroom? He looked at it and said, "There's nothing been happening on this site for a year. Somebody just threw up a bunch of scaffolding." And likely they're just painting something that's already there.
Yeah.
And that takes us to the big issue. If they were not actually built the way they were said they were, and like you said, there might be 20 options, but to me there became two most logical possibilities. A, these fairs were built with a technology that they weren't supposed to have, that they really were built in the time frame presented, but they had to do it with some sort of different technology. Or B, a lot of the buildings were already there and were part of an ancient civilization.
Yep. I'm leaning towards the ancient civilization theory. What do you think?
I am too. I mean, partially it's a bit more romantic, I guess, to believe that, but it does indicate, because there's so many of these buildings, unexplainable buildings all over the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South America. They had these fairs in Cambodia and the Philippines, and they were
places
everywhere.
you'd never think that they would be, right? Like Cambodia.
And the buildings all look the same. Yeah, and the buildings all look the same. So they all look like they come from one almost template. And so, yeah, to me, I would be leaning to something like these fairs had, maybe 10 or 15 surviving buildings, and they really did build some plaster and staff smaller structures around them, and then all you have to do is paint them all the same color, and it's same with the same paint, and you can fool almost everybody. Yeah, then I think that's what.
Yeah, then it looks like we built all of this totally. Can't you see? They all look the same.
They all look the same. And there's always one building that would survive. They always claim that one building had to be built permanently, and it would usually because it was some sort of art gallery at the exposition, and then it became a museum or art gallery after. So there is still one in Chicago. Mm-hmm. There is still one in San Francisco. All of these, they still have one. And of course, it's that, they're only going to build one. They just need to build just one real building.
It's so absurd.
Again, it was just, and the more I studied this stuff, like I say, the deeper and deeper it got, I kept thinking, you could keep doing this for 20 years of study, and I finally had to, at 7-9 months or whatever, just say, okay, I got to stop and get the book out. But it just every single fair has. How about the one in Nashville, right? That supposedly built an exact perfect replica of the Parthenon.
Yeah,
this is a bizarre story. So they built the Parthenon, and this is the claim, though, that again it was supposed to have been built as a temporary structure, but they claimed the cost was good of demolishing it was going to be too big, and so they decided to remake it, make it into a perfect structure and create the stonework that's there and whatever today. But let's get this straight: they kept that building, but there was the Commerce Building or the Agriculture Building, which were twice the size at the fair. They didn't have a problem with the cost of tearing those down or the difficulty demolishing those, but this one, they said, they had to do it because it was too costly to destroy. Well, why wouldn't you keep the bigger ones too?
Oh, it's so crazy. It just is absolutely bizarre and makes no sense whatsoever.
No.
So who does this? I'm sure this crossed your mind many times. Who in the world or what is behind all of this?
Isn't that the $90,000 question we're asking even right now? Who's behind all of this right now? And I would have to in some way say it's the same group.
Same group of invisible to us anyway. Entities, people, we don't know what they are or who they are or anything like that, but pulling the strings, manipulating all the energy systems, including money, to play the game that they want to play. It's amazing to me that this is our world that we live in. and that there is so much that's hidden from us. And of course, most people are programmed to just kind of walk around, live their lives with blinders on, never really question much of anything, because there's always the prefabricated answers to anything, whether it's history or scientism, any of those things. There's always the answers that are quick and easy to grab that, oh yeah, that makes sense. But very little of it makes sense when you really look into it, right?
That's a really useful comment that you just made there, that whole piece. And it really, I think, ties into the name of your show, Inside the Matrix, which if you just start to study this reality at all, and I did a lot of testing reality in my early work and found that reality didn't pass the test. Mm-hmm. That the solidity and the solidness and the realness of everything is not anything like that. And I think until a person really begins to get that reality isn't as real as you think it is, that it's much more of a projection or an energetic perception that you're having, that starts to give you, I think, a better chance of unraveling what might be really going on.
Yeah, I mean, it is crazy. And this year, I think, because of the events, because of the complete manipulation of our, this is worldwide, this is not just in one country, it's forcing us, at least those of us who think and are capable of thinking, to question all of these things, question history, question our current events, who and what is behind it, and what is the purpose, what's really going on here, and why. And then you think of things like in the Georgia Guidestones, and why the heck are they there? And what is that message, for us? What's the purpose of that? And are they, in fact, trying to live up to that?
Yeah, you've got, there's what you might call, I hate the word, but the idea of some type of awakening, just for the sake of using a word. There's two kinds of it. There's the one kind that you might say is inside the matrix, inside the dream. It's seeing the construction of it, the workings of it, the etc. And then there's from the dream, right? Actually seeing it all as a dream, as an artificial construct. And that's where I did 3 or 4 videos on my channel on Plato's cave, on that analogy. And I really think as the deeper you go into that story that Plato left, that can really begin to unravel what we're dealing with here. If somebody really wants to go into it, because it's quite dangerous for the mind and the self to do so.
Well, let's jump in. We are inside the matrix. So yeah, let's discuss that.
Well, we can go anywhere you want to go. To me, the fairs for me are like a stepping stone into another examination of history. And then once you examine history, well, is science true? Is this true? Is this true? And then, well, what is true? What is actually true? And that becomes quite a challenge of not only to know what, because one person I really became after my experience that I never met him. I only got to know him through his writings and his lectures, was a man named Richard Rose, who ran the TAT Foundation in Virginia and later actually published my book, which was to me an honor, actually. And Rose was very clear that you can't go searching for truth because you don't really know what it is. What you have to do is go searching for false. Find the false, drop it, get rid of it, go look for more false. And eventually, the one thing you can't drop, the one thing that you find that's not false, that'll be the truth, no matter how strange or weird or odd it might be. That's it.
That's interesting.
And it's, I think, which is the opposite of how people usually go about it.
Sure. That's a very interesting way of looking at things in investigation, right?
investigation, and it means it's available to everybody all the time, because you can just start with the small. You start with the smallest things, right? Well, maybe I shouldn't eat 5 donuts for breakfast. That's false for health for my body. Okay, and you start small, dropping little things, and then as you start going deeper and deeper and deeper, the questionings that you have to ask: is this true or not? How do I know it's true? Become harder and harder to go through, and require more and more study or more and more clarity, and eventually they start to get very challenging as to something you've just automatically accepted your whole life, and like, well, wait a minute, why do I believe that?
Mm-hmm.
Why do I believe that's the truth, as opposed to how would I know that it's true? It's so that was such a way. The way he presented it was such a beautiful package of his idea was, you don't walk into the truth, you back your way into it, and you bump into it by accident after you've thrown away everything that's not true.
I love that. Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. And very little else makes sense in our world today if you take it at face value, because unfortunately, most people have lost the ability, or maybe they never had the ability, to really question things, to really think rationally. And it has left us in a position where we're just being completely manipulated and just pushed around like little ants on a farm, and of course the elite or whatever you want to call these controllers, elite's not really a good name, because they're despicable. I mean, they're evil in every sense of the word. They just lead us around, and they call us useless eaters. They call us the bewildered herd, and for good reason, because they've manipulated the minds and the thought processes of people to that state. Very frustrating. And of course, we talk about these things because we're able to see them, and we want other people to see this too, because as soon as they do see it, the game will be over.
Yeah, I mean, we're roughly around the same age, I guess. And so when we were in school, there was still an expectation to some critical thinking at some point.
And problem solving, things like that, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's been sucked out of schooling for the last 20 years. Then you add this dependence on a screen, and particularly dependence on the screen to give you instant answers.
Yeah,
means you don't have to think.
That's right.
About anything.
It's all right there for you. Don't think about it. Just take the answers as they're given to you. Anyway, we're running up against the break once again, Howdie, and we're going to take a short pause right here. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Howdie Mickoski. We'll continue our conversation in just a little bit, so please stick around with us. All right, welcome back, everybody, to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Howdie Mickoski. And we're having a fascinating conversation today, and I hope all of you are enjoying it as much as I am. And this is the kind of information that I think needs to go out everywhere. So please, I'm asking everybody to please share this information, share the link to the show, and get it out to people who have never looked at these things before. And I think it's the type of thing that will spark thought processes that maybe have never been sparked before. And a lot of people, at least that's our intention with this today. So Howdie, let's continue on. I want to briefly touch on the concept of Tartaria and mud flood and all that, because a lot of people are researching these things, and that's just... as you pointed out before when we were talking before the show, that's just a small part of this whole picture, right? So to refer to, hidden history and things like that as Tartaria or mud flood, those are just small little segments, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, to me, when I sort of put it into my mind now, I treat it like it's a buzzword. So as opposed to people who take a word like mud flood, which a lot of people use it in this research community directly to mean that cities were covered in some sort of mud catastrophe, and that's the only thing that they will talk about in general, that it has to be this and it has to be that way. And to me, I look at it as a term that just means some sort of destruction, some sort of catastrophe. And there could be all sorts of possibilities that to me could be then labeled under that, just like a heading. Something similar with the word like Tartaria, which they try to, they'll look at the buildings, for example, these fairs, they're Tartarian buildings. Tartaria being a part of now modern Russia that was on old maps, and that seems to have been a very ancient culture, civilization at the time. And while to me, I would more look at it as that there was a similar interconnected culture all over the world, but it had different names in different places.
Right.
So we can say there was a world culture, but I wouldn't necessarily want to say it has this particular name, because I don't say it's something similar to Atlantis. So many people they look for Atlantis and they think, I found it here. No, I found it there. No, I found it there. And that's part of, I think, the incorrect thinking with that is thinking there's only one Atlantis, as opposed to it's a time. It means a time frame. It means an era. And so there can be many places that show what might be called Atlantean type of building. So if someone wants to, like I say, keep this word Tartaria in their mind to mean like a period of history or a period of civilization, but not located or centralized to one place, or one place being more important than another, then I think those words are fine to be sort of used.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but it is far bigger than that. And just to clarify a little bit for people who have never heard the term Tartaria or what the heck that means, is there. If you look at maps from the 1800s and before, you'll see that there was a nation or country, region, I'm not sure how you best refer to it, but over in Central Asia, extending from China to what is now known as Russia, into Russia. And I guess it would include Siberia, what we call Siberia today, as Tartaria. And it was shown on all these ancient maps, but all of a sudden conveniently disappeared off all maps, and there's very little about it in the history books anywhere. Nobody talks about it. So that, I think, sparks a lot of people to look in that direction and under that name. But that's just one thing that's that's been hidden, right?
Right.
There is so much to talk about here, because there's a lot of really good research going on with people looking at piles. I guess you'd call it piles of rocky rubble, being possibly buildings that were melted or just destroyed, but pieces of them still remain and look as they possibly did when they were actually a building. And I hope I'm being clear on that. But there are some areas where you see the side of what would look like a building, and they'll say, well, that was carved into the rock here on the side of this mountain. And what's your take on that? I mean, it would seem to me that these were actually once buildings that have been destroyed in some way, melted, fractured, but yet parts of them remain. And then you have interiors with, hollowed out areas and stuff like that, which look possibly like it could be what it once was a building.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really done too much in that area. I guess probably one of the guys doing a lot, that would be John Levy. He's really looking into that stuff now, and really interesting guy. And there's a lot of really good researchers out there. I don't want to exclude these. A lot of people, and people that at the beginning I learned a lot from the videos that they had done 2-3 years ago that taught me. But that's. I think it takes you to these places of having to say, no, wait a minute, what have I been told? What have I just come to believe? And as long as you hold on to the belief, you're losing the next step of possibility, as opposed to being able to say, yeah, I've always thought this was a hill or a mountain or whatever, but wait a minute, maybe it's not. How can I tell the difference? Mm-hmm. And that's where it might start taking you into some, because yeah, some of them do look strange. They look strange.
They do. And to say that, really primitive ancient people with horses and buggies and things like that and carts actually had the technology to carve out these giant structures, or look at the, huge statues and the pyramids and things like that. None of it makes any sense. And then you look at the buildings. How do these people with horses and carts and no roads construct these massive buildings? How were they able to get the materials around? Where do they find the materials? I mean, none of it makes any sense whatsoever when you really look at it.
No, and that's one of my favorites is you see the building, you'll see these original pictures of whatever building they say has been built, like take the Smithsonian in Washington as a good example. So they say they built this building, right? But when you look at the initial photographs, there's no road. Like there's no proper road to get there. And like any construction person whatsoever, especially when you're building a beautiful structure and you need massive stones and, work and equipment, you build a road first. That would be natural. Help your logistics. Yeah. There's no road to any of these places, So it's all these little things that you don't, if you're just blindly looking at the picture and you're just going to go, wow, that's a neat building. Wow, how amazing that they could build that. But once you step back, well, wait a minute. Here's all the things that are missing that should be in this photograph. Something's wrong.
Absolutely. And I know we're just kind of randomly going on different things, but I'm trying to bring out things as they pop into my head. And another thing that I've seen pictures of in the past are electric cars in the early 1900s and charging stations for these electric cars. And so people marvel today, oh, we have these electric cars, not in its present form, but this concept and this idea, the usefulness of it has been around for a long, long time. And somebody put a stop to that a while back, because we had electric cars in the early 1900s, and there's pictures of them you can find. So, do your research and take a look and ask yourself the question, if we already had this technology, and of course they weren't nowhere near as nice as the ones we have today, but, we should have had something just, miles and light years beyond what we have today, if that's where we were 100 years ago.
Yeah, or how about 1930s Germany? In the middle of the Hitler reign, they had Skype.
I didn't know that.
There's great photos of people talking to somebody in another town, and the images are there like a television screen. The person they're talking to.
I didn't even know that. That's very cool. Okay, that brings us to another concept or idea of the Foo Fighters and these flying craft that were supposedly were around in the 30s. So, we know that we know nothing. We know so very little about hardly anything. We've been mainly discussing history, but technology goes hand in hand too. And we don't know anything about technology that really exists. We hear little inklings here and there, plasma driven craft, med beds, high technology for healing, high technology for your replicators and things like that. And it all seems quite possible, and maybe it is, but we're not allowed to have these things. We're not allowed to know about these things, for sure. We're not allowed to put our hands on them and see them or use them. This, in the same way, we're not allowed to know what our true history is, where our civilizations came from, what came before. And this always brings us back to who and what is blocking all of this? Who is pulling the strings? Who's the Wizard of Oz?
And it's a little bit of an unseen group, and it's each one of us at the same time. We talk about the technology. Well, what got this started for me was the big cathedrals of Europe. And the cathedrals of Europe, this sort of ties into a lot of these terms and discussions we were looking at, is that the recognition that they were not built for any kind of religious purpose, that the religious ideas to them came much, much later, that they were built as energy machines, and that the tower, usually the tower or the dome is built with a copper roof with the exact geometry to pull energy into the building, often with liquid mercury. And I can give you an example of when I was in Nantes recently, not the cathedral that recently had the fire in it. That's the St. Peter, I think, but in the other one, in the St. Nicholas Cathedral. Because some
where was
cathedrals,
this at?
a lot. This is in Nantes, in Western France.
Okay.
And some of the I've been in a lot now, and some of the cathedrals are just either a dead energy or really nasty energy, actually, but so many are still almost pure, clean, like Chartres is a really good example of clean, pure energy. But
really?
So when I was in this one in Nantes, I stood underneath the main tower, and you could almost feel yourself getting charged in there, like literally like you were like, it was like electricity just going into your body in a really good way. And as I stepped aside, I could feel it or almost notice it circulating around the outside. I can't remember the names of the side parts of a cathedral, the sort of the edges off the nave. But it was like it was rotating in that area. And I get the sense what would have happened is something, and maybe it's the organ, because again, these organs, every one of these cathedrals had these absolutely massive, beautiful organs that play these specific notes. And I get the sense that would have channeled the energy that was being stored, and they were sent out of the rose windows, because all of the rose windows make perfect cymatic patterns. Like there's various cymatic patterns you can test, and they will be the exact rose windows you'll see in these cathedrals. Like this one in Nantes has two beautiful ones on each side of it. And I could already feel the sense of this energy would then get projected. So it's not just being projected out energetic, it's being projected into a specific wave pattern that I would assume would create balance or harmony or whatever they felt they needed in the city. So to me, it's like if you got sick in whatever this was 500 years ago, you wouldn't need a doctor. You wouldn't need a hospital. You would just go to what we see as the cathedral and just go into the energy spot and just wait. Give yourself 20 minutes. Wow. Because that's how energizing some of these places were. And they very much remind me to a similar time. I mean, obviously the pyramids and the big sites in Mexico and Egypt are on another level, but at many of even the stone circles here in Scandinavia, because I also study the hundreds of stone circles here, and I have one person as a story. He's in his 70s, so quite an older man, but he's still quite mobile, but has a very bad back. And there was one specific stone circle I had shown him that was kind of hidden out of the way that I thought had a very strong healing energy. Mm-hmm. And now, whenever he gets a sore back, he just goes to that stone circle, stands in it for 20 minutes, back is fine.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And so why don't we have access to these things? Well, it's always the same answer, right? It's that something or someone, and you're right, we are complicit in this because we don't demand answers and we don't look further and we don't insist on knowing the answers. But there are forces, energetic forces that are controlling all of us in all of our world. I always wonder, take a guy like Nikola Tesla. Mm-hmm. He's credited with, coming up with all this amazing technology. And is he really one of the people that actually remembered the previous civilization that was wiped out?
Yeah, there's two theories to that, right? There's the Nikola Tesla was somehow connected to some sort of ancient understanding of energy and knowledge and how the earth works and how this reality is. Or there's another theory that says Tesla isn't even real, that he was just a pseudonym to try to explain where all of this found technology came from. Mm-hmm. That's a big theory, that as sort of you moved across the United States, they were founding cities, right? A city was founded which if you read the word, it means found dead. So there's a theory that as you started moving westward, you just kept finding these ancient cities, and within the ancient cities would be ancient technology, and that anything that was new was labeled under Nikola Tesla. Now, I don't know which is correct. I would lean to him being a real person and there being something maybe like the technology that they found was sent to him and his job was to reverse engineer it. That might have been something like that. But those are some of the theories that are out there. And to me, it all leads to, like, my initial work was on ancient Egypt and trying to understand and finding just how energetically incredible and perfect some of the structures were, some of the things what you could actually do with them. And I realized early on that, yes, this force that is here needs to make sure humans don't know about that, because if humans know about what was in our past and realize that it wasn't some sort of space aliens that did all this, it wasn't some sort of, some magic being coming from the heavens. It was humans who had complete control and knowledge of the depth of our power, the depth of complete human understanding and the power that a human has here, that it wouldn't take long for everybody to say, well, why do we have these crappy buildings and this crappy way of living when we can just regain our power and live like this again? So to me, that's why history is so important, to see that all of the important things that point to great power in each single human being needs to be hidden in order to make sure that things can be as they are.
Absolutely true. We've been dumbed down and we suffer from amnesia in a severe way. We don't remember really what's going on. And a lot of us don't even remember what we've already learned. If it doesn't come up, over and over again, we tend to forget a lot of things that we've already learned. It's really crazy how all that works. And
have you ever had anyone on, by the way, who from talk about the Hopi prophecies? It just came to my mind.
No, but
on your show,
let's talk about it.
Well, it was more just because it would be really interesting, I think, now to hear again from a real Hopi elder. Because one of the things that has been in my mind for 20 years this is about 18 years ago when I got into the Hopi prophecy, was they had talked about there are two roads, right? A material road and a spiritual road.
Right.
And at a certain, for most of the time, you can switch roads. So you can be material for a while, you can be spiritual for a while, but they talked about certain events that were going to be like a precursor to a key moment. And after this specific moment, you wouldn't be able to switch anymore. Whatever road you were on is the road you were on, and that literally reality would split into two. Mm-hmm. That there would become two realities from one reality. And I'm really wondering if we're in the beginning stages of that potential split.
Well, in the sort of new agey love and light group, they talk about this great split between dimensions. So you got a third dimensional where all the nastiness goes on, and then we branch off into some kind of a fifth dimensional experience, which is all wonderful and great. But who knows? I mean, but it's the same sort of concept of this dichotomy of a world splitting into different groups. Then you have the concept of timelines. So are we we're on one timeline that looks really jacked up right now, with all this massive overreach control stuff from the globalist New World Order crowd. And then there's supposedly other timelines that we could possibly jump onto. I like that idea. Let's get off this train and let's get on some other tracks that are really fun and, beneficial for everybody.
Well, I've had those experiences. I've had so many in the course of my life, but I've experienced parallel realities. I've actually experienced myself dying, another version of me dying.
Wow.
It was 1999, and I was walking down the street and I was replaying a conversation in my head that I had. I'd been on a bachelor auction date. And it turned out it was for a women's shelter or something. So of course I say yes when they ask me to do it. And the woman who bought me, so strange to say that, the woman who bought me was an alcoholic, like a complete alcoholic. And it was just a frightening evening experience for me. And the next day I was walking down the street and was replaying some of the conversation because it was so weird. And one of the things she asked me, she had said, why did you start studying all this spiritual stuff anyway? It sounds like a giant waste of time. And I remember I didn't answer then, but I answered it out loud on the street. I actually said it out loud. There's nobody around me, but I just said it because I would be dead now if I didn't. And I instantly, the scene in front of me, the street went away, and I saw a highway, and there was a car and a truck that had been hit, that had come together, like a tractor trailer and a car. And I remember sort of looking into the car, and there was a woman in the car. She was injured, but she was kind of okay. The guy who'd been driving the truck was standing sort of on the side, quite shaken up, but he was sort of, I guess, trying to get help there and whatever. And then I finally noticed there was a third car turned over in the ditch. Wow. And I kind of, moved over. I can't say I walked because I was kind of like in a semi-dream state. And I kind of moved over, and I'm just wondering how this person was. I looked in the window, and the driver was me, and I was dead.
Wow.
And I realized that at that exact second was the moment I died in at least one other parallel reality. And so right away, that changed everything in my life, because now this was not a theory to me. I've just experienced it. And so I now know there's millions of me's, which would make sense. I mean, some of the standard spiritual literature tries to say, well, they want the Creator wants experiences from you. It wants to have experiences. Well, why would you only live one life then? One way through. That's a limited experience. Why not have a million lives in the same body, and you'll get tons of experiences? It makes perfect sense.
Oh, that is so awesome. I want to continue on that line of thought, Howdie. We're going to take a short pause right here. You're listening to Inside the Matrix, and we're having our fantastic, amazing conversation here with Howdie Mickoski. So we'll be right back. Stick around with us. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Howdie Mickoski. And Howdie, before the break, we were talking about parallel lives, and you were sharing with us the experience that you had of seeing this accident and then seeing yourself as the driver one of the drivers who got killed in the accident. Now, when you saw yourself, did you look exactly the same as you do now, or you did then?
Pretty much, yeah. It was, there's no doubt that was me.
Okay. So it wasn't like you saw a different looking person and you recognized, hey, that's really me in another life or something like that. But it actually looked like the way you look now. Yeah, and
that was how it eventually, because about a year after that, I did some journey work because I got curious and I wanted to know, where did that accident happen? And I managed to journey back. I found the roadway that it occurred on. I found the place I was living. I found out who I'd been married to at that time, and it was someone I'd already known, I'd already dated in this current life, but it didn't work out. And wow! With that particular woman that I had been dating, I had always been afraid to drive her car. I was always, I always had this very strange, eerie feeling that if I drive her car, something bad is going to happen. So once I realized this is the woman who I'd been married to when the death happened, I'm wondering, of course, was that her car that I'd been driving? I had to borrow her car for some reason or something that day. And, so again, once I began digging, seeing the truth in this, it started to make complete sense that there must be millions of me's, just like there's millions of yous and millions of everyone listening. And that, on one hand, that really hurts the ego, because the ego likes to be special and important.
Yeah.
And it also, but it frees some in a bit, because it means then that there must be so many choice points where we go one way in this life, well, in another life we've gone another way. So if you've failed in something in this life, well, you must have succeeded in it in another one. And by the opposite, if you succeeded here, you must have failed in another one.
That makes
And
a lot
so
of sense.
it brings in this. So you would have this total package, and I think that's some of what happens in our dreaming now. I think some of the dreams that we have, because we have so many dreams that are so real to us, and not weird in any way, just like real life experiences, but an experience that we didn't have. But if you give yourself 10 million lives, you might have, in that dreaming point, somehow your consciousness shifted for a little bit, and you experienced something, another real you experience in another reality. But again, how does that change everything when we're focused totally on this reality, totally what's going on right now, all the time? This is it. This is the reality. But wait a minute, maybe there's 10 million me realities going on. Holy smokes.
Yeah, and that brings to mind, it makes so much sense, but it brings to mind the idea of the Creator, which is collectively all of us, experiencing creation, experiencing our own creation. So here we are. I mean, the way my sort of philosophy or take on life in general, or whatever this experience is that we created this and many other things. And I think that's why I totally agree with this concept that we live multiple lives simultaneously. We are the creators, fractionalized, and we created these realms to live in, these experiences, these lives, so we could actually go into our creation and experience them. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and these, like I say, that experience really, really got me, examining in a totally different way, because this wasn't an idea from a book. This was me.
Yeah, and that was a real experience for you. That
real experience.
So fascinating.
And once I started tracking it with similar experiences, or some almost like time loop experiences that I've had, and then you add the experiences when I was, like I say, testing reality, and reality was not holding. There was a real stepping back of having to say, well, like you said earlier, well, I really don't know what this is. I really don't know what it is, and I have to be open now to possibility. Yeah,
and that brings to mind the concept of cognitive dissonance, which is what people run into. That's the buzzword name for what occurs to people when they're faced with things that just totally blow away their sense of reality, their sense of security. Because truthfully, most people's sense of security is based on ego, but the ego's knowing of who they are, what they are, the experience that they're involved in, why it is, and all these, like we talked about before, all these preconceived ideas that have been fed into us of who we are and what the world is and why the world is. And when you begin to explore beyond these concepts, for a lot of people, it's very devastating, because it completely rattles their cage and throws out their whole sense of security.
Yeah, that's what a mystical experience is. An experience that is quite beautiful and transformative, and will change a person without question. Will change a person in how they go on and view things. An awakening experience, though, is generally a shattering of the mind in some way. Mm-hmm. Somehow that the entire sense of self and identity and belief structure somehow gets blown up, and you're now having to deal with the aftermath of something that had been a foundation, no longer there as a foundation.
Right. And I guess we can liken it to the chick hatching out of the egg, or the butterfly hatching out and becoming a butterfly from a caterpillar. I guess these are similar things that we can sort of visualize and conceptualize in our minds as to how that works and what happens. And I know lots of people experience things, but they kind of keep it to themselves, and they don't really talk about it because other people don't understand. If they haven't experienced things like that, they don't really get it. And they'll look at you and judge you as just being somebody that's a little off their rocker, so to speak. But we know, you obviously had some incredible experiences, and I've had a few of my own. And when you go through these things, you realize that there's way more to all of this. This is not all there is, right?
Right. And it's why I used to do lectures years ago, was partially sharing parts of my story, because there might be someone else out there who's had something similar happen to them, like you say, and have never really talked about it with anybody, or did and got laughed at. And it just gave them someone to say, okay, I think this person knows what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm not crazy. And there's been a number of people like that just the feeling that, okay, maybe what I had was an experience and not something crazy, just immediately changes their whole perspective on everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Before we go too much further into that, because I think people get what we're talking about here. There are experiences that just, unless you've had them, you'll never grasp what it's all about. But I know you studied ancient Egypt, and I'm fascinated with that. And I have a strong affinity towards that for some reason. I don't really know why. But let's talk about some of those things of ancient Egypt that you discovered. Okay,
so you say you have this affinity. Well, what's something that really interests you about Egypt, or what's a thing that really gets you going? Or,
I think when I think about ancient Egypt, I see the depictions of it. You see the pyramids, and you see, all of the graphics that we've seen associated with ancient Egypt. I feel like that was a time when we had tremendous technology, but the technology was us. It was not like a cell phone or a computer. It was what we did with our minds. I couldn't say it better myself. That's when I go to a place, like when I'm at the Giza Plateau, or I'm at Abu Sir, or even if I'm in Mexico at Teotihuacan, or one of the things that I most love about being there is that I feel like, how do I try to describe it? I'm in a place before an egoic parasite existed. That's I'm still touching that time. It's like that time still functions there. And right away, I just literally feel like I'm touching almost like a different universe there. Yeah, I makes sense to me. And I have that strong feeling that that's where we were at that time. We have, to me, technology is fake. It's a fake substitute. It's a poor substitute for what we really can do as human creator beings.
Yeah, and I'll give you. I've shared this story a few times, but I'll share it again for you and your listeners to maybe give a different perspective of how deep ancient Egypt really might be. And when I talk about ancient Egypt, of course, there's what I consider the non-Egyptians who built the pyramids and the really big structures from way back, and then there's what we call pharaonic Egypt that started in the Old Kingdom. That's sort of similar to almost like the World's Fairs. They came and the stuff was still there, and they started using them as best they could, and so there's even what I would consider an ancient Egyptian. There's still, I think, a period before them that was a total level up. But I was in one of these Middle Kingdom temples near in Karnak. There's a small temple there that kind of very few tourists go to, and you can have lots of quiet and peace. And I got to know the guards really well when I'm there, so they leave me alone. And I was sitting in one of the back rooms, and I wouldn't say meditating, but I'm just being very still, and I'm staring at one wall and the reliefs on the wall. There's an Osiris and an Isis, and things are happening. I'm just trying to really take it in. And there's maybe an hour of staring. And then all of a sudden, there was like the wall started shimmering, kind of like on a hot day when the road gets that mirage-like shimmering. Sure. So the wall did that. And then all of a sudden, there was a completely different set of reliefs and images on the wall. Wow. And I realized, oh boy, they actually did this holographically. There's layers even in the reliefs that are put on the walls of the temples. And again, it was one of these things, because I knew I wasn't seeing a mirage. I wasn't seeing, I wasn't hallucinating or anything. I mean, I literally, the wall I'd been looking at for an hour just vanished. and I was seeing the next layer, and I was started afterwards. Of course, I'm wondering how many layers could there be? How many different actual? So when you're thinking of in energetic terms, if you're thinking of certainly the world as energy, and you're thinking of these ancient places as energy, we have to remember how many potential layers of energetic things have been built into them that we don't even see or can even fathom. I just sort of got lucky, I guess, that I got into the right vibrational state or something from being so still in there long enough that I got to see what was behind. But I started realizing that's all of them. They were all done like this.
Wow. And that of course brings us to the holographic world, the whole concept of it. And I totally think that that's exactly what we have. And when you get down to the most minute levels of what we perceive as things in the world, whether it's a rock or a stone or a tree or a human body, it's all light. It's all particles of light that come together and coalesce into structure of some kind. So, yeah, it makes so much sense. And then, of course, when you also consider the idea of the visible light spectrum that we're able to perceive with our eyes is so tiny. It's just a little sliver of what actually is out there. So we're seeing a very small part of the visible or the light spectrum itself. And then other parts of the spectrum, we actually hear light with our ears in certain frequencies. We don't see that. We hear it. So it's a different way of sensing and perceiving that reality. Makes total sense to me, though, that we live in a holographic world, and this is a projection of some kind from somewhere, right?
Yeah, and I know, I think like Castaneda, he described it in his books as like fibers of light, or fibers of just fibers, I think. And of the millions, we have learned to choose a very small number of them to create our reality.
Yeah.
And if you just start learning how to shift to deal with these other fibers, you'll start creating literally completely different worlds, completely different realities. And I think the value of that metaphor is useful right now because I think that's what's happening to the world today. I think really what's really going on today, when you get through all of the nitty-gritty detail, is an attempt to retune the humans to a different radio channel. That literally everything is the whole thing is being done to, let's say we've been on, most people have been on AM 950 for quite a while. Some have been 955, some are, 946. We've been close enough, but now all of a sudden they're tuning the frequency to 940, way off. And they're moving or attempting to move the mass of humanity to this 940, which is why everyone's behaving so strange to the people who are still on 950. The actual reality that's being experienced by the masses now is not actually close enough to anyone who stayed on the same frequency, and it means you can't even communicate. Even though we still see the same tree and are experiencing the same table and the same whatever, literally we're coming from a different frequency wave now. And that might help people understand why it's so hard to talk to people about what's going on, because you're literally not on the same radio station anymore.
Wow, that's such a great way of putting it, and that's I think that's a concept anybody can grasp, and that makes so much sense. We're operating on different frequency levels, different radio stations, as you put it, and that makes a lot of sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it helps me to not get as frustrated. I still get frustrated when I see how people are just behaving, but when I start to realize, but literally, they've dropped the frequency. It's like there's been a level drop, and they've kind of followed along with it, and those who didn't are in a different reality, in a different experience. And I think if you can, at least for me, keeping that in my mind as a metaphor has helped to not get overly upset or frustrated by what I see.
Yeah, I can't say that I've been able to do the same because I'm extremely frustrated by what I see and saddened in a lot of ways because I don't think people really grasp the direction that this is going or, how deleterious this can be to all of humanity, the direction that we're going. And this is a chance, this is an opportunity for humans to really advance in so many ways, and especially, spiritually and in consciousness. And we're kind of like throwing it out, and for the most part, I'm talking collectively on a very widespread level. We're letting it go, and we're not seeing the lesson here that's to be learned yet. And I often think to myself, how bad must it get before we say, no, we're not doing this anymore? That is the question that I often ask myself, and perhaps it's not bad enough yet.
Definitely not bad enough yet. For we've been living in Huxley's Brave New World for the last 50 years. That book the concept was built on comfort. Mm-hmm. That you could keep, if people were comfortable, you wouldn't have problems dealing with them because the comfort level was so smooth. So they haven't had to rule with much of an iron fist up to this point because everybody's been so comfortable. Now, the comfort level for most is still there, but give it 6 months, give it 8 months, give it 10 months. The comfort level is going to start dropping really quickly. And then we will start to see what can happen. But again, if you keep in mind, we're dealing with frequency changes at the same time. How is the frequency change going to change the thinking process of various people?
Yep, that is the question. And that's what I find so frustrating. If you can see the game for what it is, or at least mostly what it is, we'll probably never see everything. But it's so very obvious that this is going downhill quickly in a very bad way. I just hope and pray that humanity can wake up in time. And it makes me wonder, we were talking about previous civilizations and previous things that have happened in the world. Is this yet another reset? Is this yet another destruction of civilization so that whoever is behind all of this can start over again?
Yeah, maybe. Or one theory I've had the idea of a time loop for quite a long time, that there's time reaches a certain point and doesn't go further, re-loops back to an initial stage and starts again. And you have to remember, there's been a lot of very wise groups and civilizations on this world, and they're not still here. Now, does that mean that it's very difficult to get out as a large group? Maybe this is maybe the lesson in it all is this is something that's, you can't awaken the masses, you might say. You can only work on yourself and maybe a few people in a small group. That the opportunity is still totally there for everybody potentially, but you can't think of it in terms of billions. You have to think of it in terms of 5,000, 10,000, 50,000. Maybe that's where the opportunity is, and you have to decide, do I want to be on the train of opportunity or not?
Yeah, well put, well put. Now, we only have a couple minutes left, but I wanted to have you tell everybody where they can find your work, where they can find your books, where they can find all that stuff.
Sure, thanks. I guess the easiest place to, just if you want to look at the book titles and et cetera, would just pop on over to Amazon, I guess. That's the controlling place for books now, unfortunately, but that'll give you an overview there. My website, which I guess will be linked up there, just use my name. I chose a very bad name for it, Egyptian-wisdomrevealed.com, but you can go there and at least get information. I have a YouTube channel. It's Howdie Mickoski Talks. We don't know, of course, how long that's still going to be active and running. Yep. I'm going to be starting to move things to other platforms and sort of be available, but my website and as well will keep you informed as to where things are going to be and what's going on. But as long as you have my name you should be able to bump into something somewhere and, take a look around and see what something interests you.
Yeah, and there's so much to explore, and of course we've just only scratched the surface on the content of what you've written about and things that you know. So I want to just express that we so appreciate your work. We appreciate you and your willingness to come on the show and share with our audience what you've learned, and hopefully a lot of people out there will be able to relate with their own experiences that they've had, and I know I certainly can. And let's hope that we will be able to usher in a better world from all this craziness that we're experiencing right now. So I want to thank all the listeners. Thank you for tuning in today to Inside the Matrix. Thank you, Howdie Mickoski, for being with us. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. All
right. So we will see you next week, everybody. Inside the Matrix. Be well, be safe, be happy. Bye for now.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.